Have you ever given everything to a family who never even saw you? Have you ever spent your life trying to earn a smile, a word, a simple gesture of pride only to be treated like an afterthought? What happens when you finally realize that the people you tried to hold on to were the first ones to let go of you? This is not just a story about loss. It's a story about finding the courage to choose yourself, even when it means standing completely alone. Let's begin. My name is Madeline Carter. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that being the quiet one, the dependable one, would eventually earn me a place in my family's heart. I live in New Haven, Connecticut, and I run a healthcare tech company that recently closed a Series C funding round, bringing our valuation close to $28 million. But if you ask my family who I am, they'll tell you, she works with computers or something. Growing up, I was never the star. That title belonged to my older brother, Andrew. Andrew was the kind of son who made every family gathering feel like a celebration of him. Captain of the varsity team, law degree from Georgetown. Tall, handsome, confident. When he walked into a room, my parents beamed like the sun had followed him inside. When I walked in, well, sometimes they forgot to even set a place at the table. It wasn't that I was jealous. I genuinely wanted Andrew to succeed. But I also quietly wished that maybe, just once, someone would look at me the way they looked at him. Instead, family friends would lean over during holidays, asking, "And what do you do again, Maddie? Still doing that tech stuff?" I'd smile, nod, and let the conversation drift back to Andrew's latest courtroom victory or his dazzling new girlfriend. Still, I stayed close. Even when I moved out for college, even when I was working 70-hour weeks building my company from scratch, I kept one foot in the family circle. When Mom mentioned that the dishwasher broke, I wired $2,000. When Dad hinted that the house insurance was overdue, I paid it off without a second thought. Over 4 years, I spent nearly $96,000 covering their bills, without anyone ever asking if it was too much. Not once did they say thank you. Not once did they ask how my business was doing, if I was tired, if I was okay. It didn't matter. I kept giving, believing that one day, maybe they'd see me. Maybe I'd finally be enough. I lived like that for years, carrying a silent hope tucked deep into a part of me I didn't dare look at too closely. A hope that, despite everything, family would mean something more than just blood and obligation. I was wrong. I just didn't know yet how wrong I was about to find out. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I booked my flight home. March was cold in Connecticut, but in my family's town in Vermont, spring always arrived a little softer, a little earlier. Mom's 60th birthday was coming up, and for once, I had cleared my entire schedule to be there. No meetings, no deadlines, no excuses. Just family. I imagined showing up early, helping to decorate the living room with old photo albums and blue hydrangeas, her favorite flowers. I imagined surprising her with a simple silver locket I had engraved, a quiet thank you for the years she spent holding the family together. Even after everything, I believed being there mattered. I believed it would mean something. Then came the message. It was a text from my father. Short, sharp, surgical. "Madeline, for this year, it's better if you don't come. Andrew is introducing someone important. We want everything to go smoothly." At first, I stared at the screen, convinced I must have read it wrong. Maybe there was a second part coming. Maybe he meant something else. Anything else? I called him immediately. The line rang twice before he picked up. His voice was steady, almost too steady. "Maddie," he said, "Jessica's parents are coming too. They're influential people. Doctors, philanthropists. It's a big day for Andrew. We don't want any confusion or awkwardness." I swallowed hard. "So," I said, my voice barely holding, "you're worried I'll embarrass you?" There was a pause. Not a defensive one, not a confused one. A pause of agreement. "You know how hard it is to explain your work," he said, choosing every word like it was a landmine. "It's not personal. It's just better this way. Not personal. Just better if I wasn't there. I could hear the television blaring in the background, the clinking of silverware, the normal sounds of home, only now they felt a million miles away. Like the house I once belonged to had quietly changed the locks. "Okay," I said. I don't even remember hanging up. I just sat there, phone slipping from my hand onto the coffee table, heartbeat pounding against a hollow, aching chest. For 34 years, I had stayed loyal. For 34 years, I had carried their burdens, paid their bills, hidden my loneliness behind polite smiles. And now, with one text, one call, they had erased it all. It wasn't anger that came first. It was silence. A heavy, stunned silence that settled over me like a second skin. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing, dogs barking, children laughing as they kicked a soccer ball down the sidewalk. Inside, I was standing still, suspended in a moment I would remember for the rest of my life. That night, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop, logged into the payment portals one by one, and canceled every automatic transfer. Electricity, water, internet, property insurance, medical premiums. Each cancellation felt like cutting a thread I had spent years tying, knot after knot, tighter and tighter, thinking it would hold us together. The final total flashed across my screen. $111,000 over 4 years. Not a gift, not an investment, just a silent offering to a family that never truly wanted me to sit at their table. I closed my laptop. The apartment around me was quiet, still bathed in the soft, dim glow of the evening. And for the first time, I let myself feel it. Not the loss, not the betrayal, the freedom. Some endings don't come with slammed doors or shouted arguments. Some endings arrive quietly, on a Wednesday afternoon, inside a few lines of text, when you realize the door you kept knocking on was never really open to begin with. And sometimes, walking away isn't a decision. It's the only option you have left. The morning of my mother's birthday arrived like any other spring day. A thin mist curled along the streets outside my window, soft and unassuming, as if the world itself hadn't noticed anything was wrong. I brewed a cup of coffee, the rich aroma filling my apartment, and sat by the window with no plans, no obligations. No packed bags, no carefully wrapped gifts. Just me, my own breathing, and a strange, unfamiliar quiet. At exactly 9 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Hi, honey, I think the power's out. Can you check? Today's important." There was no mention of the conversation that had torn us apart. No apology, no hesitation. Just a request, as casual as ordering coffee at a drive-thru. I set the phone face down on the table. 15 minutes later, another buzz. This time my father. "Still no power. Water's not running either. Call the providers now." Short, cold. No concern for how I was feeling. No acknowledgement of the text that had uninvited me from my own family. To them, I was still the fixer. The invisible hand behind the scenes, expected to clean up the mess quietly, politely, without making a fuss. By 11 a.m., the floodgates opened. Message after message poured in. Mom, panicked. Dad, barking orders. Andrew, frustrated because the caterers were arriving and nothing worked. Even distant cousins chimed in, demanding explanations for why the party preparations were falling apart. Not one of them asked, "Are you okay?" Not one. I sat there, watching my phone light up like a desperate lighthouse in a fog of their own making. The house was dark. The internet was dead. The water was off. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix it. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the tension bleed from my shoulders, replaced by something else. Something heavier, but cleaner. Finality. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had only ever needed me for what I could provide. Money. Convenience. Support. Not love. Not pride. Not family. It would have been easy to pick up the phone, call the utility companies, and smooth everything over. It would have been easy to fall back into that familiar, suffocating role. But sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing. So I did exactly that. I stayed still. As the messages grew more frantic, accusing, even cruel, I brewed another cup of coffee. I sat on my balcony as the cool breeze danced around me, carrying the distant laughter of children playing somewhere down the block. And I thought about all the years I had spent fighting to belong to a family that saw me only when they needed something. Today, they would see what it was like when I wasn't there. Today, they would realize that silence can be louder than any scream. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was simply done. Sometimes the most powerful rebellion isn't slamming doors or shouting in rage. It's the quiet refusal to keep giving pieces of yourself to people who only notice when you stop. And that day, in the stillness of my small apartment, as chaos unfolded hundreds of miles away, I realized something profound. They hadn't lost me because I changed. They had lost me because they never thought they could. The day after the birthday disaster, the world outside was still gray and muted, as if it, too, was holding its breath. I sat at my desk, reviewing the weekly operations report from my team, trying to steady the rhythm of a life that no longer orbited anyone else's needs. That's when I saw it. An internal transfer request had landed in my inbox. New finance hire from another branch. The name stood out like a neon sign flashing in a fog. Jessica Monroe. Andrew's Jessica. The one they had banished me for. The one whose image I had been erased to accommodate. I opened her file slowly, my fingers unnervingly steady. Bachelor's from Harvard. MBA from Columbia. Decorated resume. Bright and polished, just like the type of person my parents adored. Current position. Deputy Director of Finance, New York Division. Requested transfer. Boston headquarters. Supervisor upon transfer. Madeline Carter, CEO. I sat back in my chair, letting the absurdity wash over me. The woman my family had excluded me for was about to walk through my doors, sit across my desk, and report directly to me. Not to Andrew. Not to my parents. To the daughter they had edited out of the picture. For a moment, I considered denying the transfer. It would have been easy. One click, one polite HR email, and she would be reassigned elsewhere. But I didn't. Because some truths don't need to be forced. They simply need room to reveal themselves. A few days later, Jessica arrived. I was in my office, reviewing quarterly forecasts, when my assistant buzzed in. "Miss Carter, your new hire is here to meet you." I told her to send her in. The door opened, and Jessica stepped inside. She was exactly what I expected: polished blazer, confident stride, a slight nervous energy masked behind a bright, professional smile. But when her eyes met mine, she froze. It wasn't the hesitation of someone who had forgotten a name. It was the stunned, gut-punched realization that the person she had likely heard so little about was not just a footnote, not just the forgotten sister. I was the CEO. "Miss Carter?" she said, voice catching slightly in her throat. I nodded once, cool and professional. "Welcome to Meridian Health Tech. Please have a seat." She fumbled for a second, then sat, her posture a little too straight, her hands a little too tightly clasped in her lap. I reviewed her documents briefly, asked a few standard onboarding questions, and closed the file neatly in front of me. "I look forward to seeing how you contribute to our Boston team," I said, standing to signal the meeting was over. Jessica stood too, hesitating at the doorway as if she wanted to say something, anything, to fill the silence hanging between us. But she didn't. She simply walked out, leaving a trail of tension in her wake. As the door clicked shut, I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. I just understood something for the first time in my life. Power isn't about titles or revenge. It's about knowing who you are, even when everyone else refuses to see it. The girl they once thought was invisible had built an empire while they were busy polishing someone else's reflection. And now, without lifting a finger, without raising my voice, the truth had slipped quietly into the room. undeniable and irreversible. Sometimes, you don't have to fight for recognition. Sometimes, you just have to stand where you are and let the light find you. The real unraveling didn't happen at the office. It happened, fittingly, back at the place where it all began. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a group text from a distant cousin. "Can't wait to see everyone at the barbecue Saturday. Jessica, excited to hear about your new job." Barbecue. Family gathering. Of course. Another stage for Andrew to shine. Another excuse for everyone to toast their golden boy and his sparkling new future. And me? Not even a mention. I had no intention of attending. I had no interest in stepping back into a room where I had already been erased. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Jessica went. And Jessica talked. Standing in the backyard, drink in hand, under the faded string lights that had witnessed 1,000 family celebrations, someone asked her casually, "So, Jess, where are you working now?" Jessica hesitated. I could imagine the flicker of panic flashing across her face. Because how do you explain that the sister they had all politely ignored was the woman signing your paycheck? Finally, she said it. "I'm working at Meridian Health Tech, Madeline Carter. She's my direct supervisor." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. A heavy, stunned silence spread through the crowd like a dropped glass shattering on concrete. Andrew's hand tightened around his drink. My mother's smile froze mid-sip. My father's jaw clenched so tight the veins stood out along his temple. For a moment, no one moved. No one spoke. Because in that single, unplanned moment, the illusion shattered. The girl they had quietly dismissed as awkward, strange, forgettable, was the one who now held a power none of them had ever dared to imagine. Jessica must have realized the weight of what she had said, because she stumbled through a quick excuse, slipping away into the house, leaving behind a gaping hole in the conversation. And the masks, the careful smiles, the polished pride, the curated superiority fell, one by one. Later that evening, my inbox filled with messages. From Andrew. From my mother. From relatives who hadn't texted me in years. All scrambling to rewrite the story, to explain, to reach out, to apologize without ever using the word sorry. Andrew's message came first. "Maddie, why didn't you tell us? You made us look foolish." As if my success had been some betrayal. As if my silence had been an act of war. I didn't respond. Because the truth is, I didn't hide anything. They just never cared enough to look. They were so busy polishing Andrew's achievements, so busy staging the perfect family portrait, that they didn't notice the foundation cracking beneath them. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindictive. I just finally understood. The love I had chased was never real. It was conditional, fragile, dependent on appearances. And when the facade crumbled, they didn't grieve the loss of me. They grieved the loss of the illusion. That night, as I sipped tea by my window, watching the fog roll in over the streets, I realized something else. They had always feared what they couldn't control. And now, standing quietly, steadily in my own truth, I had become the one thing they couldn't ignore anymore. Not because I shouted, not because I fought, but because sometimes the simplest facts have the loudest echoes. A week later, there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I saw them. My parents, standing on the porch, side by side, carrying that same uneasy silence between them. I opened the door without a word and stepped aside. They entered cautiously, as if unsure whether they were welcome, scanning the apartment that had no traces of them in it. No framed family photos. No souvenirs from childhood trips. Just clean walls and clean breaks. We sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. I poured them water and waited. It was my mother who spoke first. "We've been thinking," she said, voice thinner than I remembered. "About everything." My father cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "Maybe we didn't always show it the right way, but we're still family. And maybe now, You could help us out, just until we get back on our feet. He slid a folded piece of paper across the table. A printed proposal. $2,500 a month. For living expenses, medical bills, and what they called maintaining dignity. There was no apology written anywhere in those words. No acknowledgement of the damage already done. Only an expectation that the daughter they once turned away would now quietly pick up the tab for their pride. I looked at the paper for a long time, not speaking. Not because I was unsure, but because I finally realized something I had spent years avoiding. They didn't come to mend anything. They came to negotiate terms. Family, to them, had always been a contract. Unspoken, unsigned, but binding. One where love was conditional, where support was a transaction, where loyalty was a one-way street. I slid the paper back across the table without touching it. If you want my support, I said quietly, then I have conditions too, a written agreement, clear ownership of the family estate, full transparency. Their faces shifted. Shock, outrage, betrayal. As if I had broken some sacred rule by expecting the same clarity they demanded from me. You would put that in writing? My father hissed, his hand trembling on the table. You already did, I said softly. The moment you made love something I had to buy my way back into. My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, but she didn't argue. She simply gathered the paper back into her purse, and together they left. No hugs. No goodbyes. Just the soft click of the door closing behind them, like the final period at the end of a chapter that had been too long overdue. I stood there for a while, breathing in the heavy silence they left behind. And for once, it didn't feel heavy at all. It felt like space. Space I could finally fill with my own life. On my own terms. I learned something that day. That sometimes, letting go isn't an act of cruelty. It's an act of survival. Real love doesn't come with price tags or contracts. It doesn't ask you to prove your worth by what you can give. Real love simply stays, even when you have nothing left to offer but yourself. I chose to close that door not out of anger, but out of respect. Respect for the person I had fought so hard to become. Respect for the life I was finally living on my own terms. And if you've ever stood where I stood at the crossroads of duty and dignity, I want you to remember this. Choosing yourself is not selfish. It's necessary. Thank you for sharing this journey with me today. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or unchosen, you're not alone. Please subscribe to the channel for more true, powerful stories like this. And don't forget to check out the next video. It might just be the reminder you need that your worth has never depended on anyone else's acceptance. I'll see you there.